Jimmy Fallon had just finished his question when Julia Roberts' eyes locked onto something in the audience. 1 second later, she was on her feet. 2 seconds later, she was running. And no one could stop her. The studio froze. 400 people held their breath. The cameras didn't know where to point. Jimmy Fallon, for the first time in his 20-year career, sat completely speechless, watching one of Hollywood's biggest stars sprint down the stairs toward row 3. What happened next would become the most unforgettable moment in Tonight Show history. But to understand why Julia Roberts ran, why Jimmy Fallon cried, and why an elderly woman in the audience changed everything that night, we need to go back to the beginning. It was a Thursday evening in October. The Tonight Show's studio at Rockefeller Center hummed with its usual pre-show energy. Audience members filed into their seats, buzzing with anticipation. Tonight's guest was Julia Roberts, there to promote her latest film. A routine appearance. A routine night. At least, that's what everyone thought. But somewhere in row 3 sat a woman who was about to turn this ordinary Thursday into something extraordinary. And neither Jimmy Fallon nor Julia Roberts had any idea what was coming. Margaret Chin was 78 years old. She had flown from Portland, Oregon, to New York City for one reason: to see The Tonight Show live before, as she quietly told her daughter, "My time runs out." Margaret had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 3 months earlier. The doctors gave her 6 months. She gave herself one last dream. Her daughter, Lisa, had written to the show weeks ago, requesting tickets. She never mentioned her mother's illness. She never asked for special treatment. She simply wanted her mother to experience one night of joy, one night of laughter, one night of forgetting. Margaret had been a Julia Roberts fan since 1990, when Pretty Woman changed her life. She was going through a painful divorce back then, feeling invisible, feeling worthless. And then she saw Julia Roberts light up that screen with a smile that said, "You are enough. You matter. You can laugh again." For 34 years, Margaret had carried that message. Julia Roberts wasn't just an actress to her. She was a symbol of survival. The show began at 5:15. Jimmy Fallon walked out to thunderous applause, delivered his monologue, performed a sketch with the Roots. Everything ran like clockwork. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Julia Roberts." The crowd erupted. Julia walked out in an emerald green dress, radiant as ever, waving to the audience with that famous megawatt smile. She hugged Jimmy, sat down, and the interview began. They talked about her new film. They talked about her kids. They laughed about a prank George Clooney had pulled on set. It was charming, funny, effortless. Classic Tonight Show. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Around the 12-minute mark, something shifted. Jimmy asked Julia about her fan mail, about the letters she receives from people around the world. Julia's expression softened. "You know, Jimmy, I've been doing this for over 30 years. And I still read my letters. Every single one. Because sometimes a stranger's words remind you why you started." She paused. Her eyes drifted toward the audience, scanning the faces, the smiles, the eyes looking back at her. And then she saw her. Julia Roberts stopped mid-sentence. Her smile faded. Her hand moved slowly to her chest. Jimmy noticed immediately. He leaned forward, confused, concerned. "Julia? You okay?" But Julia wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on row 3. On a woman with white hair. On a woman who was crying silently, holding a photograph against her heart. A photograph of a young woman standing outside a movie theater in 1990, the marquee reading, "Pretty Woman," behind her. Margaret Chin had brought that photo hoping, praying for a miracle. Hoping Julia might somehow see it. Somehow know. And Julia saw. "I'm sorry, Jimmy," Julia whispered into the microphone. I need to do something." Before anyone could react, Julia Roberts stood up from her chair. She didn't walk. She ran. Down the stairs, past the cameras, past the stunned crew members, straight into the audience. The studio gasped. Jimmy Fallon rose from his desk, unsure whether to follow or wait. The cameras scrambled to track Julia's path. The Roots stopped playing. Complete silence fell over Rockefeller Center. Julia reached row 3. She knelt down in front of Margaret Chin. And she took the old woman's trembling hands in her own. "I see you," Julia said softly. "I see you." Margaret couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face. 34 years of gratitude, 34 years of carrying Julia's spirit through her darkest moments, all of it poured out in that single look. But what happened next is what no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Julia looked at the photograph in Margaret's hands. She recognized the image instantly. She recognized the hope in that young woman's eyes. And she recognized something else. Something that made her own tears begin to fall. "This was you," Julia whispered. "This was you, wasn't it? In 1990. Margaret nodded, still unable to form words. "You wrote me a letter," Julia continued. "Years ago. You wrote me a letter saying that Pretty Woman saved your life. That you were going to give up. But you didn't. Because of that movie. Because of Vivian." The audience was dead silent. Jimmy Fallon had stepped down from the stage, standing just a few feet away, watching. His eyes were wet. "I kept that letter," Julia said, her voice breaking. "I kept it in my drawer for 30 years. I read it every time I forget why I do this. Every time I feel like I'm just pretending. Your letter reminded me that pretending can save someone's life." Margaret finally found her voice. It came out as a whisper, fragile and beautiful. "You saved mine, Miss Roberts. You saved mine." Julia pulled Margaret into an embrace. The entire studio erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper. Some cried. Some covered their mouths. Some simply watched in awe as one of the world's biggest stars held an elderly stranger like she was the most important person on earth. Jimmy Fallon walked over slowly. He didn't speak. He simply placed his hand on Julia's shoulder, then on Margaret's. A silent acknowledgement. A silent promise. Then Jimmy did something no one expected. He took off his tie. The same navy blue tie he wore on his very first Tonight Show episode 10 years earlier. The tie his mother had given him. The tie he considered his good luck charm. He folded it carefully and placed it in Margaret's hands. "This is for you," Jimmy said quietly. "So you remember this night. So you remember that you matter. That your story matters. That coming here tonight took more courage than anything I've ever done on this stage." Margaret looked at the tie, then at Jimmy, then at Julia. 3 strangers, connected by something invisible but unbreakable. Lisa, Margaret's daughter, was sobbing in the seat next to her mother. She hadn't expected this. She had only wanted one good night. One last memory. Instead, she was witnessing a moment that would define the rest of her mother's life. The audience rose to their feet. Not because someone told them to. Not because it was expected. But because they understood they were witnessing something rare. Something real. Julia stood up, still holding Margaret's hand. She turned to the audience and spoke, her voice steady despite her tears. "This woman right here, this woman taught me something tonight. She taught me that the stories we tell aren't just entertainment. They're lifelines. They're bridges. They're reasons to keep going." She looked at Margaret. "You think I saved you? You saved me. Every letter like yours, every person like you, you're the reason I get up in the morning. You're the reason any of this means anything." Jimmy Fallon stepped forward, facing the cameras. "We're going to take a break," he said softly. "And when we come back, I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. Because this isn't a show anymore. This is just life." The studio remained standing through the commercial break. Nobody sat. Nobody checked their phones. They simply stood, absorbing the weight of what they had witnessed. When the show resumed, Jimmy didn't return to his desk. He brought 2 extra chairs onto the floor. Julia sat in one. Margaret sat in the other. And for the remaining 15 minutes of the broadcast, they simply talked. Margaret shared her story. Her divorce in 1990. The night she almost gave up. The movie that changed her mind. The letter she wrote to a stranger who felt like a friend. And the diagnosis 3 months ago that brought her to New York for one last adventure. Julia listened. Jimmy listened. 400 people listened. And when Margaret finished, Julia made a promise on live television. "I'm coming to Portland," she said. "I'm coming to visit you. Not as Julia Roberts the actress. As Julia. As your friend. Because that's what we are now. Friends." The show ended differently that night. No final monologue. No comedy bit. Just Jimmy Fallon, Julia Roberts, and Margaret Chin, sitting together as the credits rolled and the band played something soft, something gentle. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. In the weeks that followed, the clip went viral. Millions watched Julia Roberts run into the audience. Millions watched Jimmy Fallon give away his lucky tie. Millions watched an elderly woman teach the world what courage truly looks like. True to her word, Julia flew to Portland 3 weeks later. She spent an entire day with Margaret and her family. They watched Pretty Woman together. They laughed. They cried. They made new memories to stand alongside the old ones. Margaret Chin passed away 4 months later, peacefully, surrounded by her family. On her nightstand sat 2 things, the photograph from 1990 and Jimmy Fallon's navy blue tie. At her memorial service, Lisa read a letter her mother had written in her final days. "I thought I was going to New York to see a show," Margaret had written. "But I didn't see a show. I saw proof. Proof that kindness is real. Proof that strangers can become family. Proof that one smile, one letter, one moment of connection can echo across 34 years and still mean everything." Jimmy Fallon never wore another lucky tie. He didn't need one. He had learned that luck isn't something you wear. It's something you give. Julia Roberts still keeps Margaret's photograph in her drawer. Next to the letter from 1990. Next to the memory of a Thursday night in October when she stopped being an actress and started being a friend. And somewhere in Portland, Oregon, a family still tells the story of the night their mother reminded the world that every person in every audience, no matter how ordinary they seem, carries a story worth stopping everything for. That's what The Tonight Show became that night. Not a show. A reminder. A reminder that behind every seat, behind every screen, behind every anonymous face in the crowd, there's someone waiting to be seen. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to run, you might just find them. Jimmy Fallon still talks about that night. In interviews, in quiet moments backstage, in conversations with new guests who sit in the same chair Julia Roberts abandoned. He tells them about Margaret. He tells them about the tie. He tells them that the greatest moment of his career had nothing to do with comedy. "I've interviewed presidents," Jimmy once said in a podcast months later. "I've interviewed rock stars, movie legends, athletes who changed history. But the person who taught me the most about what this job really means. A 78-year-old woman from Portland who just wanted to laugh one more time." The Tonight Show production team created a new tradition after that night. Before every taping, someone from the staff walks through the audience and asks a simple question. "Is there anything you want us to know about why you're here tonight?" They don't promise anything. They don't make guarantees. But they listen. Because Margaret Chin taught them that every seat holds a story. Julia Roberts carries something different now when she walks onto talk show stages. A small folded note in her pocket. Margaret's final letter, the one Lisa sent after her mother passed. Julia has never revealed what it says. She only mentioned once that it ends with 5 words. "Thank you for seeing me." Some nights, when the applause dies down and the cameras stop rolling, Jimmy Fallon sits alone in the empty studio. He looks at row 3. He remembers the sound of Julia's heels running down those stairs. He remembers the silence that followed. He remembers learning that his job was never about the jokes. It was always about the people who came to hear them. And in that empty studio, in that quiet darkness, Jimmy Fallon understands something most entertainers never learn. The spotlight exists not to illuminate the stage, but to help us see who's sitting in the shadows, waiting to be found.